Please welcome to the stage U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate Change, John Kerry, for a conversation with Bloomberg Editor-in-Chief, John Micklethwaite.
Sorry, very nice to see you all. Thank you, John Kerry, for being here, the US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate. But I think the real point about John Kerry is his long involvement in all this. I think you attended Rio as a senator.
I did.
Many years ago, back in 1992. And you played a massive role in the Paris Agreement, not least by kind of brokering the joint US-China deal just the year before. So let's start with COP and what's happening, especially the kind of final text. You've had all these attempts to change things. You set a very good test, I think, for what would be success. You said that, look, we must get the world back on a pathway to 1.5 degrees, keep 1.5 alive. We've got the methane deal, we've got all these other things. You look at the pledges, and even if you believe every single one of them, we're still somewhat possibly closer to 2 degrees than 1.5. And I suppose my question for you is, what do you actually want to see in that final text that would make you happy about getting to that 1.5 degrees?
I don't know, a few $1 trillion and...
Trillion. We've got people here who
can
sign
I just
that.
say, first of all, what a great setting. It took the CIA to find it for me. It was quite an exercise. And I walked in here, I felt like James Bond, and I'm looking for Q. I want my Aston Martin, folks.
He's at the back.
He's back there. But what a great setting, spectacular. So let me, that's a great question, John, and thank you. It's a privilege to be here, and thank you all. Great to share some thoughts with you about what is happening here, which I think is building into the potential of very significant. When we did Paris, we had 195 countries sign up to something that was, every country defining its own plan. That's the best you could get out of everybody. And the 1.5 degrees was almost an afterthought to the well below 2 degrees because the island states and vulnerable countries felt they hadn't been heard enough, they hadn't been listened to. So in the last week, we put together the 1.5, and that was a great coalescing feature in the end, in sort of the denouement, the finishing moves.
There is a train, by the way.
I know.
Yes.
Great. How's the infrastructure here? Does this hold up?
Sorry.
So Paris, and I said it at the plenary at the afterwards because I didn't think we should overdo it. And what I said was, we're not guaranteeing our citizens that we're going to keep the Earth's temperature at 2 degrees. What we're doing is sending a signal to the marketplace that 195 countries are all going to move in the same direction at the same time. And that's the biggest market in the world, by the way. It's 4.5 billion to 5 billion users today, already double-digit trillions of dollars of market, energy, and transportation and industry and so forth. And the market signal really was going to affect the allocation of capital, and that was the theory. And that will change things. And we have this process in Paris where we get together afterwards and we measure our ambition. Well, that's exactly what's happened. In the first 2 years after Paris, about $358 billion went to alternative, renewable, sustainable energy investment. And we were moving in the right direction until this person appeared who, without science, without economic rationale, without anything except a kind of vindictive mischief, pulled out of the Paris Agreement, and it hurt. And it's hurt the United States reputationally for 3 or 4 years. So President Biden has been determined to come back and to reassert ourselves, not because it's politically something that you choose to do, but because mathematics, physics, science tells us this is what we have to do, and I mean have to do. So Mother Nature has played this extraordinary role in screaming at us, shaking us really, into common sense. And Glasgow is the test of that, really. So what I see happening after years of these meetings, I mean, I was, as you said, the first COP, and the creation of the COP was Rio in 1992. And before that, 1988, when we were in the Senate. And Al Gore and I and our whole group of senators were told by Jim Hansen, this is happening. So this is a long journey. And now is the test of whether we can really get there. We are told that we were told by the IPCC in 2018, you guys aren't getting the job done. You have 12 years within which to get the job done. Make the decisions that, not that you'll get the whole thing finished, but you have to make the key decisions and begin to implement on them to avoid the worst consequences of the climate crisis. So 3 years later, now 9 years we have to do that. That's what makes Glasgow so important.
And are you happy with what has been achieved?
I think
or do you want to see something extra in that final text?
Well, I mean, if I want to deal with a wish list, yeah, sure, I'd love to see something extra. But we have to deal with reality. We have to deal with the way things move and happen in public affairs, particularly in the extraordinarily complicated life of international diplomacy and multilateralism with almost 200 countries. And they're different. They have different challenges. Some of them have grown up on coal because that was all that was available. And that's all anybody sort of knew back then. And they've built 40-year assets, which are funded and have investors who care about return on investment. And there's a huge network, as you know, John, better than anybody. So the issue is, how do you move all of that? I think we're moving it rather remarkably right now. I think this COP is already different and better than any COP I've ever been to. There is a greater sense of urgency, a greater sense of focus, a greater sense of possibilities than I've ever felt coalescing before. Now, there's still some issues. There's loss and damage, there's adaptation, there's resilience, there's finance, there's the issue of ambition, which is perhaps the single most important, because if you don't have enough ambition, you're just going to be feeding the trough of adaptation. So there's got to be a balance here. Yes, we have to adapt, but the single most important thing is to avoid 2.7 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees. And if everybody, there's one thing, if everybody even did what they said they're going to do in Paris, we were still heading to over 3 degrees, folks. So that's why this is so critical. This is the checkpoint that Paris envisioned. We come 5 years later, it's actually 6 because of COVID. This is the measurement of whether or not we correct. And I see corrections beginning to take place.
Do you think it's enough? I mean, you just mentioned that according to the official numbers on the national determined contributions, we're still at 2.7 degrees on what that's going. It may come down a bit. There's an announcement today. But do you think one of the things that people are talking about here is the need to call nations back on an annual basis? Come back next year and measure the NDCs, crank it up again. Would you support that?
Well, we come back next year no matter what, because we have COP27 and then COP28.
But actually measuring...
No, let me just finish the thought.
No.
It would be, I think, insanity not to measure every year. We're going to be measuring every day, by the way. We now have satellite systems, and they're growing in number, Copernicus and TRACE and so forth, that have the ability on a daily basis to measure the carbon footprint of the supply chain of a large corporation, or to measure the entire output of a country, or the government buildings. We can pinpoint. We have accuracy. You may have seen a terrific story, I'm sorry to mention it, but the Washington Post.
That's right. It was a good story.
Had a terrific story. Yeah. You saw it, with the methane pinpointed in Russia, and the whole map of methane, et cetera. And methane, as we all know, is responsible for 50% of the warming of the Earth. It's 0.5 degrees of 1.1 now or so where we've warmed to. And if we can do the methane pledge, which President Biden put forward here, 108 countries have come forward to join the methane pledge. And as Fatih Birol told us the other day, if we can achieve the methane pledge, it is the equivalent of taking all the cars of the world, all the trucks of the world, all the ships of the world, all the airplanes of the world, and taking them to zero emissions. That's extraordinary. And you have countries suddenly focused on.
But you know as well as I do that the pledge is to have that 30%
30% reduction by 2030.
But it's not individual countries saying they will cut by X amount, which is the difference between that and the NDCs.
That is accurate. It is the difference.
And you also haven't got China or Russia in it.
Well, let's see what happens in the next days. Maybe we can work it and get
Are you enthusiastic? Do you think you might be able to pull China into the methane pact?
Well, we're working at it. I was up till 3 in the morning yesterday. It was yesterday. It's today. It started yesterday. And we were up to 2:30 in the morning the night before that, working with a number of different countries. And I'm hopeful. I'm just really
There is a
hopeful.
Pacific-China problem, isn't it? They are the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases. Obviously, that doesn't take into account the historical things that they always build up. They haven't actually done anything here other than commit to not
Well, it's not fair to
coal,
say.
to not financing coal outside China.
I urge you to go read their plan. It's the 1+N plan. And I urge you to read it because, and I spent a lot of time reading it in the last couple of days, it actually it says they will do a lot. Is it enough? No. But will they do a lot? Yes. They're talking about strictly limiting coal. They're talking about getting rid of bulk coal usage. They're talking about phasing down after a certain point. And China has 79% of all of its energy comes from coal.
Yeah.
That's the way they built a less developed country. And I can remember being in Shanghai in early 1990s, standing on the Bund, looking out at the Pudong, and there were a couple of skyscrapers going up with rickety bamboo lashed scaffolding. And then I came back 10 years later and there was another Hong Kong staring you in the face where there'd been rice paddies. China's had this incredible journey. It's been fueled by coal.
I've also sat on the Pudong and you can see the barges laden with coal
Totally.
coming down that river.
China has to move away from coal. And they're laying out a plan which isn't yet enough. So what do you do about that? Well, our theory is, well, let's try to work together to see if we can find the ways as nations around the planet to accelerate this. We've been doing that in the last months. We worked with Mexico. 2 months ago, President Lopez Obrador wouldn't talk about anything but oil. They were going to exploit their oil. Mexico was oil. That's what represented them. That was their asset. We went down there. We met with him, spent time. He spent the whole day with me talking about this. And in the end, he signed on to an agreement where Mexico said, we're going to submit a new NDC next year. We're going to deploy geothermal. And of course, they have active volcanoes. We're going to deploy hydro, solar, wind. They have incredible capacity for that in the southern part of the country. They could be a major provider of alternative resource energy to the United States, to Canada. You could, and on this next week, on the 18th, there is a meeting, a Summit of the Americas with Canada, the US, and Mexico meeting to talk about this vision of how do we come together. So, this is very different from the insults of the last 4 years. This is a genuine effort by President Biden to pull people together and to find solutions.
Do you think, just one last thing on that final text, do you think you can bring the Chinese, the Russians, these other people into committing, say, to measuring NDCs on an annual basis or to adding at least something else into the final text of what comes out of here?
Well, yes, I think we have to add to the final text. But please remember, COP is not defined just by the NDCs, particularly this COP. I mean, we started a thing called the First Mover Coalition. We have Volvo at the table. Volvo has pledged they are going to buy 10% of their steel for all their manufacture of cars will now be green steel. That sends a message to the marketplace that green steel has a market, has a buyer. And so you can begin to invest with confidence, and it begins to de-risk. In the same way, DHL is part of this. They're going to do things with their shipping to be carbon-free. Maersk has signed up. Maersk has ordered 8 new ships, cargo vessels, carbon-free. And they don't exactly know which propulsion they'll use, but they're going to do it, and they will do it. Amazon has joined this first mover coalition. So that's on the side. That's not part of an NDC, but that's going to result in emissions reductions. You have United Airlines as part of it. They made a commitment with respect to sustainable aviation fuel. So we're going to try to accelerate the creation of markets. But there are a bunch of other things. There's a market demand initiative. There's the forest initiative.
What about Article 6? I mean, Article 6 is the other, as you know, going to these last few days. That is the way by which carbon trading theoretically could be started. Is that going to get through?
I believe it will. I'm going out on the limb. I really believe it will. I think we can finish the rule book here. And our team is working.
It's been 6 years.
Our team is working really, really hard, and has been all year, by the way. This is not just a Glasgow effort. We've been working all year to work on the transparency issues, on the accountability, reporting, data, all the components. The markets is a very critical component of it. I hear more and more business folks talking about pricing carbon. President Biden has not yet made a decision regarding that, but there were a group of senators here yesterday, day before, and we had a long conversation. There's increasing discussion in the US Senate about pricing carbon. Everybody here who watches the models knows that if you change your assumption in the modeling, nothing gets you more reduction of warming than pricing carbon. It's a winner.
Why not have a carbon tax?
Well,
surely it's a better way to raise money. You tax the consumption, which doesn't work.
Looked at the makeup of the United States Senate?
Yes, I can see your problem. I'm saying in a perfect world, I'm allowed to be a willful journalist, and you sadly have to deal with these practicalities. But at least in theory, do you not see that a carbon tax is
I'll tell you a story about the US Senate. This is a complete direct. Harry Truman was a senator, and he used to sit where I began at number 99 in the United States, way back in the corner. And I was back there with Jay Rockefeller and Al Gore, and a few of us. All the newbies go back there. And he wrote home to his mother frequently, and he wrote home to his mother saying, "Dearest mother, I'm on the floor of the United States Senate, and I look around, I look at my colleagues, and I see the ghosts of Clay and Webster and Calhoun, and I pinch myself and I say, how the hell did I get here?" And then about 5 months later, he's writing home to his mother, "Dearest mother," again, a late night in the Senate. I look across the Senate, I see my colleagues, I pinch myself and I say, how the hell did they get here? So that tells you a lot about the Senate.
There is a US, but people, I think if you...
I just want to share the bright side of this. We were headed, before we came to Glasgow, we're headed towards about 2.7 degrees.
Yeah.
Fatih Birol, who's done a great job, in my judgment, at the IEA, he's turned it into a genuine watchdog and motivator, told me the other night, and he's now a report that I think is out publicly. If you take all of what has been put on the table here in Glasgow, that is to say, all the NDCs, but all the other, the forestry initiative, the deforestation target, the methane target, you add all the initiatives, he said, if everybody does what they promised to do, we would be at 1.8 degrees. Think about that, folks. The notion, before we came here, that we could be halfway through at the potential of hitting that. Now, will we hit it? The key to what happens with Glasgow is going to be the follow-up. I'm going to turn my operation into literally a mentoring, hand-holding effort. We're going to work with Saudi. We're a partner with them on their deployment of green hydrogen into the desert to the solar that will power the electrolyzers that will produce the hydrogen that then go into pipes and go to Greece to Italy and feed Europe and Africa. So, things can really happen here. There are 46 critical technologies that have been designated by the IEA. 42 of them are behind, and they're not at scale. They're critical. 50% of the reduction in emissions that we need to get will come from technologies that are not yet at scale. But President Biden just won $30 billion that's going to the Energy Department, that's going to go into our national laboratories and so forth. When we get this reconciliation legislation, and I believe we will get it in the next weeks, and that is going to be the most massive sort of effort to bring together the forces we need to try to achieve this. So I think something's happening. And the way we're going to get where we need to go is to work with Indonesia till their promises become real. Work with India. We have made a partnership with Prime Minister Modi. Prime Minister Modi has committed, even as he has a huge dependency on coal today, he wants to change the supply chain on solar panels. They're going to be making them in India. He is determined to deploy 450 gigawatts of renewable energy. And that means solar and wind principally. And they put about 100 and some out already. So we said, look, and I said, well, what do you need? How will you get there? He said, we need finance and we need technology. So we agreed in a partnership with the UAE and with Sweden to work at the hand-holding necessary to bring the technology and the finance to the table. Now, what does the finance need? The finance needs a bankable deal. That means de-risking. It means blended finance. It means some concessionary money. We can do that. We have to rewrite, I think, some of the rules perhaps for the multilateral development banks. I mean, they have, Bretton Woods is Bretton Woods. It was great for post-World War II, but we need something different now in terms of financial instruments and efforts to accelerate the deployment of the trillions of dollars that are there. We had $17 trillion sitting on the sidelines paying for the privilege of being parked in some fund or some bank or somewhere. That's insanity. At net negative interest rate, when you could have been earning some percentage in a revenue-producing, environmentally sound deal where you have revenue that comes from energy production or revenue that comes from transportation of one kind or another.
But all this is from the private sector. Just to throw some.
Well, the private sector. Let me tell you why.
Modi talked about he wanted $1 trillion from the rich countries. There was a plan to put $100 billion in, and as you well know, America. The hope was that America might put 40% of that. I think Biden's committed to putting $11 billion in 2024.
11.4 billion. No, 11.4 billion a year.
From 2024.
Well, yes, because the first budget cycle President Biden has.
Compared with the needs, it's still much smaller.
Let's get real here.
That is
the first budget cycle the president has. He is addressing climate and putting 11.4 billion in. When you're the president and you're elected, the other president, whoever that might be, has put the budget in for you. You're stuck with whatever is there. The next year is your first opportunity. That was signed, sealed, and delivered well before COP. So you're actually entering into 23. But leaving all that aside, the 100 billion is not the fight. The UN finance report makes it crystal clear that to effect this transition, to get to net zero by 2050, we need 2.6 to 4.6 trillion a year in order to do that. Now, no government in the world, not China, not the United States, we're the two biggest economies, has the money necessary to do this. You're talking in billions. Billions doesn't do it. You got to have trillions. So I decided when I left being Secretary of State, the only way we're going to win this battle is to bring the private sector to the table. So I went out, the minute I got appointed to this job, and I worked with Goldman Sachs, with Morgan Stanley, Wells Fargo, Citi, JP Morgan, Bank of America, and they have all stood up and said, and by the way, ESG is now in every boardroom in the world. People are thinking differently. We have a debate about stakeholder, shareholder.
Do you think that's very quickly? Do you think that's changed? When I first met you,
Totally.
It was governments pushing things and companies were the problem.
Correct.
Do you now think companies are ahead of governments?
Yes, totally. And not only are companies ahead of government, but companies understand that their future is tied to having a stable marketplace, a viable marketplace, having supply chains that aren't interrupted by cyclones and storms and floods and so forth. We spent $265 billion in the United States a couple of years ago just cleaning up after 3 storms. Are you kidding me? Maria, Irma, and Harvey. Harvey dropped more water in the Louisiana, Texas area than goes over Niagara Falls in a whole year. Did that in 5 days. That's just that's one storm. Irma had the first sustained winds of 185 miles an hour for 24 hours. This is what's happening, folks. The warming of the ocean, which comes from the coal and the acidification, and the heat, 90% of the heat goes into the ocean. The warming of the ocean puts out more moisture. That's your intensity of storms, and it's going to get worse. I mean, how much? Alaska had something, I can't remember, 2 feet or something of rain in a few hours the other day. I mean, you got to get real on this. This is trillions of dollars needed now, and we can win this fight. We cannot win without the private sector at the table.
I'll just push you one last time on this issue of the American government. I think if you took all the people here, they would agree with you that it's being driven now more by companies than governments. But a lot of people here, I think when Trump left, they all appreciate what you have done particularly, but they still look at America and think America is not the people signing up to do electric cars by 2035. America is still someone who's letting coal carry on, just like the Chinese are at the moment.
No, we're not, actually.
You're not financing it outside. But
No, we're not. Over 500 coal plants have shut in the United States in the last few years.
That's true.
Another 58 are going to close this year. A guy named Bloomberg has been deeply involved in closing these plants.
He's been very good on that, I think. Hopefully my job is secure. But on your job, you do have this problem.
Mike, he's a good guy.
But you have this problem. But Biden, you're out here doing this stuff. Back at home, you talked about the Senate. The Senate is not passing things in the same way.
No, it's not.
As you would hope. But it's not these different measures. The great hope was America would drive this thing. You are trying, but the motor of the American government behind you is not pushing as hard.
Well, no, it's pushing very, very hard, actually. The president is fixated on getting this legislation done. It is hard. It is hard right now. The United States Senate, I was privileged to be in the Senate when it was somewhat the old Senate. And for anybody who wants to know what that was like, Robert Caro's book on Lyndon Johnson, The Master of the Senate, is a brilliant, first 300 pages, it's a long book, first 300 pages
it's a very long book.
Are so good in describing, if you want to understand the Senate.
Yeah.
That Senate departed beginning with the Gingrich Revolution in 1994. And then we went through the Tea Party and the Freedom Caucus, et cetera, and noticed that even Republican speakers of the House disappeared during that sort of turmoil. So it became, a very difficult place. I think there are a lot of people there who really want to make things work right now. And yes, there's this divide on this one piece of legislation. But, I just have this confidence that it goes in cycles and it will come together.
You don't think that the world is changing? You look at what happened here with the fuss about people spending money on heat pumps. You look at the Gilets jaunes in France. You look at the sort of protests that happen once normal people get confronted with the costs of adapting to climate change. And I suppose my question for you is, sort of last question, is do you worry that this issue of climate change or adapting to climate change could be a bit like globalization, where the elites, the economists, politicians, people like you and me, we all support the need to do this thing, but actually when you confront it with people, you say to people, this is going to be jobs lost here, it's going to be extra money on gas, it's going to be pricing carbon, that actually when people hit that, that they won't like it. And that's what you're beginning to see in the energy crisis, which has happened over the past few months. You've seen China is pumping, not pumping, it's going back to coal because it needs to. You see people calling on natural gas. Renewables aren't ready yet, and people don't trust them. Do you worry that climate change is the new globalization in that way, something that the elites support and normal people don't?
Actually, I don't, because Mother Nature is going to be relentless. And she's more powerful than any of us. So what is going to happen is you're going to see millions of people moving from places they can't live in anymore. And if you think the Syrian exodus during the Syria war changed the politics of Europe, wait till you see the complete agricultural capacity of Africa implode. Wait till you see water not available in places. I mean, the Pakistani prime minister told me they already have a diminishment in the amount of hydro they can use because of the change in the Himalayas, et cetera. No, I think that the question is, can we manage the potential of a certain amount of chaos that will come if we don't do it? And will it all get lost in that? That's why, again, Glasgow, I think, is so critical. This moment is so critical. We are very tuned in. President Biden has major components of his legislation that are based on a just transition and on environmental justice. And there has been built into many of the politics of the world, I think many of you know this, the most massive inequity that I've seen in my lifetime. We have people working harder and harder and they don't get ahead. And that's true in societies from the United States or Europe and other parts of the world. And people who don't have those jobs don't really see how they're going to get ahead. And that's largely because we've had a really fraudulent, horrendously distorted tax system. And I used to be on the finance committee of the United States Senate. The books of the tax code would go from here up to here, if you read through them, and almost every page in them are pretty personally carved out corporate benefits, one kind or another, or individual ones. And it just doesn't work right. Let's be honest about it. When you have, well, finally, we're addressing it. G20 just said we're going to have a minimum corporate tax on a global basis. And I'm a capitalist. I believe in people's ability to invest and innovate and be entrepreneurial and go out and make money and make things. But there's a difference between capitalism and robber baron capitalism. And in some places, that's what's been practiced. So you have this incredible, that's what's fueled globalization. That's what's fueled the antipathy to it. That is what has fueled this knee-jerk anger in many parts of the world where somebody like Donald Trump could win because people actually believed he was going to fight for them, the populist rhetoric. And that if we address that better, and we've done better at that in different periods of our lives, during the 1960s, 70s, 80s, we had a more fair and less distorted system. I think we'll get back to it. I personally believe that that can be redressed. But coming back to this, just pointing out something like coal. By 2030 in the United States, we will not have coal plants. By 2035, President Biden has set a target that we will be, in our power sector, carbon-free. We're the largest oil and gas producer in the world, but we're saying we're going to be carbon-free in the power sector by 2035. I think that's leadership. I think that's indicative of what we can do. And by the way, building out a grid in the United States is jobs. It's jobs for engineers, for heavy equipment operators, electricians, plumbers, steel workers. You run the list of it. We don't have a grid. And we saw what happened in Texas. We have an East Coast grid, a West Coast grid, a little line goes across the Dakotas, and of course Texas has its own grid. So big hole in the center of the United States of America. We have a rover roving around Mars. We invent the internet, we invent vaccines, we can put a man on the moon. We can't send an electron in 2021 from California to New York. That's insane. It's stupid. And you know, we need to be able, if we had a smart grid, we can use what's happening in daylight in California in New York to help California, or to send energy to the Midwest or whatever. There's so many things staring us in the face that we can do here. I think this is the most exciting transformation since the Industrial Revolution, which I did not live through, even though I might look like it. I just think we're onto something, and I'm I'm optimistic. President Obama said to me yesterday, you know, John, I know you're an optimist, but I am an optimist, but I'm an optimist based on what's possible. And remember what Nelson Mandela said. He said it looks impossible until it is done. We're getting it done. And I think this next few days is pivotal in that. And if we are at 1.9 degrees, 1.8, we still can get to where we have to go, because the scientists didn't say you have to have it done by the end of COP. They said you have 10 years. And we now have 9 years. So we can go to China. We can work with Russia. Russia, by the way, is at the table with us. I went to Russia. We talked to Putin. He's got a challenge. He's got an extractive economy. He's got the Siberia tundra is burning. He's got infrastructure for that extraction that is very much threatened by the permafrost shifting and melting. I mean, those are real problems. How do you change that? How do you move rapidly enough to put in the alternatives? You know, we're looking at fourth generation. I met with Bill Gates the other day, talked at length about what's happening with potential small modular reactors that are different, that don't threaten meltdown, don't have the potential for proliferation challenge, don't have the waste problems, and can be actually portable. You know, the United States Navy, I was in the Navy. The United States Navy, we had ships from the late 1950s through the 60s. We've had ships that are nuclear. We've never lost a sailor. We've never had a spill. We've never had a meltdown, nothing, no accidents. So maybe the next generation is going to give us absolutely zero emissions, controllable, better option here. And I'm for all of the above right now. I'm for making sure we continue with fusion, we continue here. We're pouring our efforts into research across international lines, and I am confident, yes, that we can get there. Human beings created this problem, human beings can solve it.
That's a very good place to wrap up. John Kerry, thank you very much.